Hi, it's Sandra here from Creating Spain, and I thought I'd do a little segment today on fun foam. I love the stuff. I'm always finding different things to do with it, different ways of using it, but it can be a bit of a pain to cut, particularly if you're trying to make stamps out of it, and if you're trying to make items that are relatively delicate, it can be a tricky item. Now I have some fun foam here, and it's about 2 mil thick. It's a standard stuff that I get from the Chinese shops over here, and very similar to the sort of stuff that you will get anywhere. However, I have a piece here which was cut from this piece, and it is thinner. How did I get it to be thinner? Well, I took a comment from someone who replied to one of my blogs, a guy called Mark in Canada, and he had suggested basically squashing the stuff before cutting it, and I thought, yeah, that sounds like a good idea, but I hadn't got around to actually playing with it, so I thought I would today, and it works like a dream. I have an Evolution embosser, and all I did was I put a piece of this on the embossing on the base plate, covered it with the piece of latex that is provided, and then the hard top, and I ran it through my embosser on a number, I think it was 8 or 9, and it squished it. It flattened it considerably. Now the benefit of flattening this stuff is that it makes it easier to cut, and I was experimenting with different cut settings and so on and so forth, and eventually I did get a very good cut. And the way that I got my good cut was using a CB09 holder, which is one of these holders in my silver bullet, and I used basically what is a detail blade. Now a normal, if I undo my other holder, a normal blade looks like so. You can see that? Okay, so that's the normal blade. And the blades that I purchased by accident ages ago when I still had a Cameo and I purchased another holder, these actually use springs as well, but you can see the size of these things. They're tiny. They're rather like the size of a sewing machine needle rather than anything else, but they're very, very small. And so I put one of those in my detail holder, or my CB09 holder, and I decided to use that. I decided to use this type of blade because my logic tells me that if the blade is relatively small, it's going to find turning a bit easier. And if you're doing relatively fine cutting in lettering, then easy turning is probably sensible. Having said that, I've not tried it with the 60-degree thick blade, so maybe that would do the job even better. I don't know. But for the time being, what I'm talking about is the actual size. So this is the size that it comes out when you have cut out the letter. However, I have this one here, which you can see is considerably smaller, and it was cut out exactly the same size as this one. What did I do to it? I ironed it. The heat from the iron shrinks it. Ah, it's making more sense now, isn't it? And the reason I shrunk it is because I wanted to do this with it, and I didn't want it to be that size. I wanted it to be smaller, but the smaller you cut, the more difficult it is to cut foam. So if you can cut it larger and shrink it, all to the good. Now you can shrink it using one of these things. There is a slight difficulty though, because you're blowing hot air at it. It will shrink it, no problem whatsoever. In a few seconds it shrunk minutely. However, it does make it curl up at the same time, and that may not be quite what you want. So you can get deformed letters like this. And believe me, I had one which was even more deformed than that. But it does shrink it. I mean, these letters, or these words that I had here, just for you, were twice the size of that when I originally cut them out. And it also kind of toughens up the foam. It makes it a little more resilient. So that in itself is not a bad thing. But it does mean that you can shrink it down. Now, how did I use the iron on this? I didn't just whack it under the plate of my iron. I did use something to protect the foam. I used a piece of embroidery backing, stabilizer stuff, because I've got loads of it. You could just as easily use a piece of paper, I guess, or a piece of baking parchment, basically anything. And if you find that when you're ironing it, it curls up a bit, just turn it over and iron the other side for a few seconds and it'll flatten out. Now, I didn't use a very hot iron on this. I started on number 1 and I think the highest I got to was number 3. And I was literally counting about 10 seconds at a time. And the longer it has the heat on it, the more it shrinks. So I could have shrunk it down still further, but that's not what I intended to do. But basically that is it. It does mean that if you are an owner of maybe something like a silhouette cameo, you may, using that method, be able to cut fun foam. I don't guarantee it, but you might. It may be worth a shot. I will tell you, however, that the effect of squishing it is temporary. It will, unless you heat it as well, it will actually eventually puff back up. So the squishing is simply to get it cut, and if you leave it on your mat for a couple of hours before you're cutting it, it's going to have squished and then it will have risen back up to its normal state. So that is how I've managed to cut it, and I did do a stamp with the one that I've got on there. This one ignore, because I was doing that one-handed at a distance in front of me. I stamped this one and it's not come out perfectly. I'm sure if I took some trouble over it, I'm not a practice stamper, I could get a decent stamp out of it. And this bit here was due to the fact that I attached it with a piece of sticky tape, and the sticky tape curled, and so that is actually sticking out like the foam is sticking out, so it caught on there as well. But if you do heat it, it does make it a bit thinner. I think you'll find it is still thick enough to stamp with. I don't think that will be an issue, but obviously you will then have to adhere it to something else to make your stamp. What I suggest you use is window cling, because the window cling will stick to your stamp block and you won't have to use any extra glue. You just put your sentiment onto the window cling, glue that in place, and then use the window cling to your block, and all is hunky-dory. Okay, I hope you found that of use. I am planning on doing a blog to go with this article as well. And at the moment I am waiting for a piece of fun foam to dry, because I've tried putting some dimensional glue stuff on it. I can't remember what it's called now. But the stuff that makes it go all like glossy accents. I'm not sure if it's the branded one, but something very similar. And I wanted to see what that did to it. You can actually see from this that when it's heated it does darken it slightly. And so another use you might decide you have for this when you've actually shrunk them is actually stick them onto cards and things as they are, as a dimensional object, instead of just using them for stamping. Okay, I think that's it. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye bye.